They hurt you, over and over again. They mistook your silence for weakness. But you didn't fight back. You didn't scream. You didn't stoop to their level. You simply walked away and let the universe do its work. Now, the consequences are catching up to them, one painful piece at a time. Karma may be slow, but it never forgets. And you're no longer broken. You've become calm, untouchable, and stronger than ever. This isn't revenge, this is silent justice. And your peace is the loudest punishment of all. The pain that makes no note one day, they didn't hurt you with fists, nor did they scream at you in rage. They chose something else more subtle, colder, and far more cruel. They chose silence, indifference, the kind of neglect that makes you feel like you never even existed. There were no fights, no climaxes, just you, standing there, slowly fading in an invisible void, pushed outside the borders of their concern. And still, you stayed. Not because you were weak, but because you were loyal. You believed it was just a rough patch. You hoped the distance was temporary. You saw potential in them, even though they stopped showing it long ago. You believed in the good, even when the good had already walked away. They never apologized, yet you forgave. They pulled away, and you still held on to hope. You poured light into a space that only echoed darkness. And little by little, you began to doubt yourself. Were you being too sensitive? Were you asking for too much? Were you imagining everything? They didn't strike you, but they shattered you from the inside. And it was there in the long silence, in the coldness disguised as busyness or stress, that you realized you were slowly disappearing, not because you lacked value, but because they lacked the capacity to see the treasure right in front of them. What does Stoicism teach us? That not all pain is loud, not all loss comes with screaming. Sometimes, the deepest wounds are the ones no one sees, the unread messages, the conversations where you're invisible, the fake smiles and hollow eyes. It's the feeling of being abandoned while still physically present. Those who feel deeply often hurt the most, not because they are weak, but because they choose to love even when they understand the risk of being hurt. But unreciprocated emotion isn't just a lack of affection, it's a silent declaration. Your pain isn't important enough for me to care. That is cruelty hiding beneath calm. That is how someone kills trust without ever raising their voice. No yelling, no tears, just growing distance, unexplained disappearances, and a coldness that creeps in like frost, painless at first, but gradually it kills the heart. Marcus Aurelius once wrote, "If someone does wrong, don't rush to judgment, see to understand." And so, you began to understand. Not everyone has a heart like yours. Not everyone loves with the same depth. And not all silence is accidental sometimes. It's the very weapon they use to break you, without laying a hand. Understanding that, you stopped blaming yourself. You started letting go, not out of anger, but out of clarity. You realized their coldness didn't reflect your worth, but exposed their limits. And from that moment, you no longer needed answers. You no longer needed apologies. You no longer needed them to come back, because what you truly needed was yourself to come back. You once softened yourself so they wouldn't feel pain. You shrank yourself to fit the small space they offered. But now, you understand, that wasn't love. That was losing yourself to keep someone who never intended to stay. Now, you walk away from the darkness not with noise, not with blame, with quiet resolve. And the most powerful truth is this: it is your silent departure that finally forces them to confront the truth they kept avoiding, that they lost something rare. Not because you vanished, but because they were never mature enough to hold on. Silent but precise karma. You didn't strike back. You didn't try to expose them. You didn't showcase the wounds they left behind. You chose a different path, quieter, but far more powerful. You chose healing. You chose silence. You chose to let go, not because you were weak, but because you understood one truth. Karma doesn't need noise, it only needs time. While you lay still with unhealed wounds, the universe never slept. When you chose kindness over revenge.com, over confrontation, and forward movement instead of waiting for an apology, karma began to speak. But not in the way you expected. It didn't come with thunderous punishment. It didn't repay pain in the way the world imagines. Instead, it mirrored quietly, precisely, and deeply. The universe doesn't retaliate with storms, it restores balance in silence. Those who once dismissed you, who mistook your silence for submission and your kindness for foolishness, are now beginning to feel the void, not because of anything you did, but because you're no longer there. No one checks on them at 2 a.m., no one is there to listen when the world turns on them. No hand reaches out when they fall. They thought you'd always be there until the day you weren't. That is karma. No announcement, no warning, just your complete and final disappearance, leaving behind a silence that forces them to face themselves. You don't need to witness their consequences. You don't need to check their social media or follow their story. You don't need to see anything, because deep down you already know. You know that the emptiness they feel isn't from your absence, it comes from within themselves. They are not being punished by you, they are being mirrored by their own actions. No one lives in cruelty without paying a price, only the timing is unknown. Seneca once wrote, "Time will bring everything to light. Falsehood will collapse under the weight of its own choices." You don't need to pull off their mask, life will do that for you. by letting them feel the consequences of what they did when no one was watching. Karma gives no warning, but it remembers every time. You chose patience over anger, silence over reaction, love over bitterness. The universe took note. No one escapes the law of cause and effect, no matter how well they hide it. You once hoped they would wake up. You hoped one day they'd realize your worth. But Stoicism doesn't teach you to place your faith in others' transformation. It teaches you to trust in yourself, in your ability to let go, in the power of stillness, in the journey of living without needing to prove a thing. You don't need revenge, because your growth is a louder message than any punishment. Those who hurt you don't understand. They didn't just lose a person. They lost a mirror reflecting the best parts of themselves. They lost a safe place, someone who once loved them without condition. And now, they must live with themselves fully, without your presence to soften, carry, or comfort. That is the price, and no one escapes it. So no, you don't need to watch them fall. You only need to keep living kindly, steadily, and calmly. Your healing, your rising, your refusal to look back is the universe's quiet justice in motion. Karma doesn't come to punish, it comes to restore balance. And in that process, you don't need to stand by watching anyone else collapse. You only need to stand tall, in the light of your own becoming. Hi ChatGPT. The cruelty in COLDNS. Not everyone who hurts you does so by yelling. Not every wound comes from slammed doors, arguments, or direct insults. Some choose a more silent form of cruelty, not by hitting you, but by not holding you when you tremble. Not by harsh words, but by never saying the right ones when you need them. Not by blatant betrayal, but by never truly staying. They choose the coldest weapon, indifference. They hurt you by not seeing you, not hearing you, not acknowledging your existence. They are physically present, but emotionally absent. They don't need to say anything cruel to make you bleed. They simply stay silent when you need them most. They just stand there, watching you fall apart, and feel nothing. And it's this coldness, wordless, emotionless, that destroys you the most. Not the obvious betrayal of actions, but the quiet erasure of your presence. As if you never existed in their world at all. You begin to question yourself. Am I being too sensitive, you ask? But no, you are not. You are just in pain from being treated like a stranger in a relationship you gave your whole heart to. They never say anything clearly, and that's what traps you in a gray zone of emotions, where nothing is certain. Not love, not hate, not presence, not absence. Cruelty isn't always loud. Sometimes, it's prolonged silence, a cold stare, the message that never gets a reply, a conversation where your voice echoes into nothingness, a moment when you need someone and they don't come. Each of these, slowly but surely, breaks you down. You used to think pain only counted if it was obvious, but now you understand. The quiet kind, the one with no clear shape or name, is the hardest to heal, because it makes you create thousands of excuses to comfort yourself. Instead of facing the one truth, they're rejecting you just without saying it. Stoicism doesn't teach you to fight back. It doesn't tell you to scream, "I deserve to be loved." Instead, it teaches you to face truth directly, without denial, without illusion. When someone chooses silence over communication, distance over closeness, apathy over care, that, too, is communication, and the message is clear. You're not important. No goodbye needed, no explanation. They just vanish. Or worse, they stay, but as a shadow. You think that if you try harder, love more, stay patient, they'll change. But the more effort you give, the more they retreat. And slowly you forget that love should never be a one-person race. You've shrunk yourself to fit the silence they offered, held back your feelings so you wouldn't be seen as too much, accepted the bare minimum, and called it affection. But now, you understand that wasn't love, it was losing yourself. And in the moment you realize their coldness doesn't reflect your worth, it only reflects their emotional limits, that's when you begin to walk away. Not with shouting, not with revenge, but with quiet strength. The Stoic doesn't resist, the Stoic observes. You don't need to justify your pain or name it to make it real. You only need to recognize how they chose not to choose you. And then, you choose yourself. Cruelty, wrapped in coldness, is hard to see. But once you've seen it, you can't unsee it. Their silence is no longer a mystery, it's just lack of care disguised in you. The one who once waited in the dark have now stepped into the light. You no longer tremble at the distance they create, because you've come to understand. Silence is not love, coldness is not depth, and indifference is never a form of connection. That is the moment you stop. Not because you no longer love, but because you now understand. Love cannot grow in a place where it is not returned. Stoicism. Observe, don't judge. When someone hurts you, the instinctive reaction is usually anger. You want answers, you want to speak up, you want them to admit it, to explain, to take responsibility. But Stoicism teaches the opposite. You don't need to react. You need to observe, not because you're weak, not because you're running away, but because you've grown wise enough to understand this. Truth doesn't come from justifications. It reveals itself in actions, in choices, in the silence they give you. Marcus Aurelius once wrote, "If someone does wrong, it is not your place to judge but to understand." Understand that not everyone has the same level of emotional maturity as you. Not everyone knows how to love with depth. Not everyone has the courage to face themselves when someone repeatedly ignores your feelings, hurts you without apology, or shows consistent disregard. It's not just carelessness. They are sending a clear message. Your emotions are not important enough for me to change my behavior. It may sound harsh, but it's the truth. And Stoicism doesn't sugarcoat the truth. It teaches you to accept it as it is. You don't need to chase after fairness. You don't need to explain, justify, or prove your worth, because their actions have never been, and will never be, the measure of your value. They may leave without a goodbye. They may deny the pain they caused. They may tell a different version of the story to protect their image. But you don't need to correct them, because those who are truly awake don't speak much. They simply observe. Observe how someone treats you during your most vulnerable moments. Observe if they make an effort to understand you, or if they choose silence because it's easier for them. Observe not to find fault, but to uncover the truth. And when that truth reveals itself, you don't judge, you don't become bitter, you simply step back so you no longer waste energy on what no longer deserves it. This is the essence of Stoicism, not the suppression of emotion, but the choice to act from reason rather than instinct, not pretending not to care, but being selective about what and who you care about. When you stop judging others, you begin to see them as they truly are, without expectations, without projections, without illusions. And in that clarity, discover who's truly present and who was only there out of convenience. You don't need to resent someone who couldn't love you properly, because not everyone has learned how to love with a sincere heart. Some people love out of habit, some to fill a void, some to control. And the moment you stop being easy to control, they walk away. But Stoicism doesn't teach you to beg. It doesn't teach you to seek validation from those who no longer see you. It teaches you to accept the truth even when it breaks your heart, and then you let go. Let go without bitterness. Let go without hate. Let go because you've come to understand no one needs to say I was wrong for you to heal. No one needs to come back and apologize for you to move on. Because your healing doesn't come from their words, it comes from your inner stillness. From the moment you stop checking your phone at night, stop decoding their silence. Stop shrinking yourself to fit a version of love that never truly embraced you. You don't fight back, but you're not surrendering. You don't seek revenge, but you don't forget. You don't wish them harm, but you no longer invite them back, because Stoicism teaches that you have power over your mind, not outside events. And when you truly understand this, you don't need to judge anyone, because you're strong enough to stay centered, no matter the storm around you. You step back, you observe, and you move forward with peace, not poison. No one hears you say I'm okay more than the universe itself. And in that profound silence, karma is still at work, quietly, precisely. You don't need to do anything. You just need to live fully, calmly, and without needing to prove anything at all. Your disappearance is the ANSWA or not. Every story needs to end with a conversation. Not everyone deserves an explanation. Sometimes, the clearest answer isn't made of words, it's your disappearance. You were once fully present, genuine, patient, loyal. You listened when they were silent. You forgave when they were wrong. You gave your heart, believing it was enough to make someone stay. But the truth is, love breaks when only one person is holding it together, and you broke. Not all at once, but slowly, day by day. With every moment they didn't ask, didn't listen, didn't care. They didn't leave with a loud goodbye. They left through silence, cold, indifferent, and proud. They didn't hurt you with actions, but with absence, by not showing up when you needed them the most. Still, you stayed. You hoped. You waited. You told yourself they're just busy. It's just pressure. Maybe tomorrow will be different. But tomorrow never came. Only you remained in silence. And then, one day, something shifted. You stopped looking for reasons. You stopped explaining why you were hurt. You stopped asking questions. You stopped waiting for a late apology. You began to understand some questions don't need answers. Some people don't deserve another chance, and so you disappeared. Not with noise, not with blame, not with accusations. You simply withdrew your energy, quietly closed the door you had left open for too long, quietly stopped trying to keep alive a connection that only existed on your side. You let go not because you were weak, but because you were strong enough to know your worth isn't tied to someone else's recognition. Stoicism doesn't teach revenge. It doesn't teach you to win. It teaches one core truth. You have the right to walk away without permission. You have the right to protect your peace with silence. You have the right to leave the places that hurt you, not out of hate, but because you deserve better. Your disappearance is not manipulation. It's a message. It's the answer. It's the final chapter in a long story of abandoned hope. They won't understand right away. They might call you sensitive, dramatic, or immature. But one day in a quiet room, when no one listens to them the way you did, when no one loves them with the depth you once offered, they'll understand. They'll realize you didn't disappear because you stopped loving. You disappeared because you had loved enough and finally learned to love yourself. You don't need to react. You don't need to post about how well you're doing. You don't need to explain the pain they caused. Because true strength isn't loud, it lives in calm understanding. And silence, when born from clarity, is the most powerful response of all. You don't need to prove your disappearance was justified. You just need to live, to grow, and to keep walking. And on that path, you don't need them to look back. Because the truth is, they were given chances more than once to hold on to you, and they didn't. You didn't vanish to be remembered. You vanished because you woke up. You realized holding on to a one-sided relationship is the same as letting go of yourself. The moment you stop making excuses for someone's silence, you begin to hear your own voice again. When you stop chasing those who don't value you, you start moving toward yourself. And suddenly you no longer need an apology. You no longer wait for them to return. You no longer search for a final answer, because you already have everything you need in your own quiet departure. Because sometimes you don't need to say anything at all. Disappearing is the strongest reply. No hate, no noise, just you, peaceful, grounded, and never looking back. The judgment of karma, they hurt you again and again, as if it were routine. Not with fists or cruel words, but with indifference, with empty stares. By making you feel invisible in a relationship you once believed was real. You didn't speak out, you didn't cause a scene, you didn't seek revenge. You simply endured quietly. You tried to understand, to forgive, to hope that one day they would finally see the pain you carried in silence. But that day never came. And while you were healing, while you were gathering the shattered pieces of yourself, karma began to speak. Not loudly, not with fury, just at the right moment. Stoicism teaches that you don't need to judge others. You don't need to chase justice through human hands. Because the justice of the universe doesn't scream, it arrives in silence. Karma doesn't need your permission to do its work. When they took your kindness for granted, the universe took note. When they chose silence over dialogue, coldness over love, harm over healing, karma missed none of it. Because karma doesn't punish with fire. It judges through reflection. It puts them face to face with the very image they tried to deny. The image of someone who didn't know how to love, who didn't know how to cherish, who failed to protect the most precious thing they ever had, your trust, your sincerity. Karma's judgment doesn't arrive when you want it. It arrives when you no longer need it. When you've already let go. When you've already healed. When you've stopped longing for apologies. That's when karma shows up. And when it does, it doesn't need your eyes to witness it. It doesn't need you to watch or to celebrate. Because you don't need their downfall to rise. You already rose on your own. People often think they can hurt you without consequence because you didn't fight back. They confuse your silence with weakness. They see your kindness as an open door to take more. But what they don't realize is this. Silence is not surrender, it's the final warning. And karma, it doesn't threaten, it waits. Waits for the moment they realize all the relationships in their life lack depth. Waits for the moment they need someone to understand and no one like you is there anymore. Waits until their victories feel empty because there's no one left to share them with. And in that quiet space they finally face themselves. No one left to blame. Nothing left to hide behind. You don't need to judge them. Karma already has done it, gives them exactly what they gave. A life lacking true connection. Lacking real love. Lacking the depth you once brought. And the cruelest part, they lost you, not just a person, but a chance to become something better. They lost the only one who saw their wounds and didn't run. The only one who loved them, not for perfection, but because you saw the light buried beneath their pain. And in blind selfishness, they threw away something sacred. Karma doesn't need your hand. You don't need to retell the story. You don't need anyone to understand your pain, because those who live with truth are always rewarded with peace, and those who live in lies are haunted by their own emptiness day after day. All you need is to keep moving forward. Live with integrity, live with strength, not with bitterness but without backing down. You are the proof that it's possible to forgive without returning, to understand without holding on. Karma's judgment is not like human revenge. It doesn't come to destroy, it comes to restore balance. And you, the one who loved fully, who gave selflessly, who stayed silent through the pain, you don't need to win. You just need to let go. You don't need to witness karma. You used to believe that if someone hurt you, they should at least face the consequences. At the very least, they should understand what they've done. But then one day you realize you don't need to witness karma, because karma doesn't show up to perform. It shows up to restore balance. They hurt you not once but repeatedly, not with shouting or direct cruelty, but with neglect, with silence, with the kind of cold indifference that leaves you collapsing in the empty spaces they deliberately created. You forgave. You waited, you hoped, you did everything you could to save what felt like a genuine connection. And then, you realized, you were the only one holding on. Stoicism doesn't teach revenge. It teaches letting go, not because you're weak, but because you're strong enough not to need their downfall as compensation for your pain. You don't need to stand there and watch them fall. You don't need to track their lives for proof that justice exists. You don't need to silently scroll through their posts, their words, their failures just to feel repaid. Because that isn't healing, that's dependency in another disguise. You don't need to see karma arrive. You just need to know it always does. Not to make you smile, but to set you free. Karma doesn't need you to be a witness. It only needs you to walk away. When you leave without hate, without expectation, you hand it over to the universe, and the universe will handle the rest. Because you can't control whether someone learns their lesson, but you can control whether you keep trying to teach it to someone who refuses to learn. You don't need them to suffer for you to feel relief. You only need one thing: peace. And true peace begins the moment you stop hoping for justice from the very person who caused you harm. The more you watch them, the more you wait for them to admit fault, the more you trap yourself in the past. Karma isn't for you to see, because your reward isn't their failure. Your reward is your recovery. Your reward is the life where you no longer have to bend to keep someone from leaving. You don't need to witness them losing you, because you are the loss. They lost an honest soul, someone willing to forgive, someone who truly listened, someone who stayed even when staying wasn't easy, but they took it for granted. And now, what they assumed would always be there is gone. That is karma, not in the form of disaster, but in the shape of an irreplaceable absence. You don't need to know if they miss you, if they regret it, if they come back, because none of that matters anymore. Not every journey needs closure. Not every wound needs an apology. You don't live waiting for acknowledgement. You live to grow, to move forward, to never look back. Don't need anyone to admit they were wrong, because your very existence standing strong, living kindly, loving life again is the loudest declaration of all. Karma isn't for you to watch, it's for you to release. Because some reckonings come quietly at night, in the mind, in the kind of emptiness that only the one who caused it can feel. They will remember you not because you retaliated, but because you no longer exist in their world. No reactions, no explanations. Your absence speaks louder than any word ever could. You don't need to see them fall, because you don't need to win. You need peace, you need freedom. You need a life no longer tied to pain. You don't need to watch karma work. You just need to keep walking toward the light, to the place where they can no longer touch you, because you don't need their ending. You only need your beginning. You don't need closure, wait for an apology, a final conversation, a message to bring it all to an end. A clear ending to something that once felt so real, but it never comes, and that's what hurts. Not just that they left, but that they left in silence, no explanation, no goodbye, nothing for you to hold on to truly understand that it was over. You replay the memories, asking yourself, what did I do wrong? You type messages and delete them. You stay awake at night, wondering if they ever missed you, if you ever mattered at all. But Stoicism teaches a painful but freeing truth. You don't need closure. Closure, the clear ending we long for, is often just an illusion. A way for the mind to try to control what can't be controlled. It's how we delay letting go, clinging to the idea that if we just understood why, the pain would hurt less. But the truth is, someone careless enough to hurt you is rarely courageous enough to face what they've done. That's why they don't come back. They don't apologize. They don't acknowledge your pain. They go silent, not because you're not worthy, but because they're not deep enough to carry the weight of the hurt they caused. Closure doesn't come from the person who broke you. It comes from you. When you stop waiting, you don't need their confirmation that your pain was real. You lived through it. You swallowed tears on nights they vanished without a word. You held on to a relationship that only you were still fighting for. That was real, and that's enough. You don't need more proof. You just need to accept what happened and remind yourself you deserve more. You once believed that if they apologized, you would finally be free. But the truth is, even if they came back, their words wouldn't heal what they've ignored for too long. Endings don't always come in neat packages. Some endings are silent, unspoken, but still loud enough to echo through every moment where they chose not to show up, not to care, not to choose you. And that was your answer all along. Stoicism doesn't teach you to seek justice from others. It teaches you to seek peace within yourself. When someone leaves without a word, don't chase them for closure. Run toward yourself, the version of you still standing, still wounded, but still capable of healing. You don't need closure from them. You need compassion for yourself. You need a space where you can say, I deserve a love that doesn't require convincing. Closure doesn't come from conversation. It comes from letting go. Letting go of the hope that they'll return. Letting go of the wish that they'll understand. Letting go of the belief that their explanation would fix anything. Because in truth, healing doesn't come from answers. It comes from the decision to keep living without them. No final words. That's okay. No last message. That's okay. No goodbye hug. That's okay. Because you still have you, and you will still live. You don't need closure from them. Because the truth was always there in how they withdrew, in the silence they left behind, in the quiet disrespect they never even bothered to explain. Don't mistake silence for mystery. It's not deep, it's just immature. And what is your true maturity? It's when you stop seeking an ending from someone who was never strong enough to give it to you. It's when you decide to move forward without an apology. It's when you no longer let the lack of an ending stand in the way of your new beginning. You don't need closure. You need freedom, and you only need one person to give it to you, yourself. Change begins with why you not. Everyone will apologize. Not everyone will come back to explain why they hurt you. And not everyone will recognize your worth until you're no longer in their life. You waited for them to change. You believed that if you were more patient, softer, more loving. They would finally see, but as time passed, you were the only one holding on while they let go, again and again. And then, you realized, change doesn't start with them. It starts with you. Used to think that if they admitted their mistakes, if they returned and said, "I was wrong," then somehow your pain would finally heal. But Stoicism teaches a powerful truth. You don't need others to change for you to find peace. You only need to change how you see yourself. You can't control someone else's behavior, emotions, or choices, but you can control how you respond, what you'll learn, and how you continue forward. You cannot heal in the same environment that broke you. You can't keep holding on to a relationship that demands you shrink yourself just to feel loved. So, real change isn't about waiting for someone else, it's about making a decisive move from within. You choose to walk away. You choose silence. You choose to stop explaining. Not because you stopped loving, but because you finally started loving yourself more. You can't expect others to treat you better while you continue tolerating mistreatment. It's time to stop trying to fix what was never yours to fix. To stop carrying emotional responsibility for people who refuse to grow. It's time to stop living your life in supporting roles just to keep a temporary connection alive. True change happens when you finally say enough. Enough sacrificing. Enough explaining. Enough giving without being seen. Enough shrinking yourself so others can feel comfortable. You don't change to seek revenge. You change to stop being a victim, to stop enduring what you don't deserve, to stop needing someone else's validation to believe you matter. You don't need anyone to see you once you've learned how to see yourself. You once chased closure, apologies, reasons, answers, but now you understand, not everything needs a reason to end. Sometimes, the ending is the reason, and in that moment, you stop waiting for the world to change. You become the change. Change begins with you, when you're silent without bitterness, when you leave without proving a point, when you grow without needing to be seen, when you choose peace over needing to be right, when you stop asking, "Why did they treat me like that?" and start asking, "Why did I allow it for so long?" You realize, it's not that you were too sensitive, it's that they were too careless. It's not that you asked for too much. It's that you accepted too little. It's not that you weren't good enough. It's that you were too real for people used to pretending. Being stoic doesn't mean being numb. It means being clear enough not to let your emotions control your direction. You don't need to scream to be heard. You don't need to prove your worth. You don't need someone to admit they were wrong for you to be free. You've changed not to make them regret losing you, but so you'll never again regret losing yourself. And that change begins within you in how you say no to what no longer deserves a yes. In how you stop justifying your worth. In how you stop hoping others will become what you imagined. You're no longer who you used to be, the one who waited, who begged, who broke in silence. Now you walk in light, not needing applause, not needing an audience, because you finally understand one profound truth. Change doesn't come from the outside, it begins on the inside, and it begins with you. Stoicism is strength in a silent style. They hurt you, not just once, but again and again. Sometimes with sharp words, sometimes with cold indifference. At times they acted as if you didn't exist. And despite the pain, you stayed, you gave, you hoped. You didn't explode in anger, you didn't retaliate. You chose silence. Too many. Silence looks like weakness. But Stoicism, the philosophy of calm discipline and inner mastery, says otherwise. Silence is not surrender. Silence is the proof of strength that's been earned. In a world full of noise, where everyone's trying to defend their ego and prove themselves. To remain silent when you have every reason to speak is the ultimate act of personal power. You don't need to scream, "I'm hurt." You don't need to expose anyone to reclaim your dignity, because the truth does not need your defense. It reveals itself with time. While you heal quietly, patiently, with resilience, life takes care of the rest. Those who cause pain without awareness will, sooner or later, face their consequences. But you don't need to witness it. You don't need to wait. You don't need to prove anything. Stoic silence isn't numbness. It's the conscious choice of someone who knows their worth. When someone disrespects you, they expect a reaction, anger, hurt, breakdown. But you don't give them that. You step back not out of fear, but because you understand not every battle deserves your energy. So what lives in your silence? Self-respect, because you refuse to beg for love. Maturity, because you don't need to win every argument. Inner strength, because you stay composed in chaos. And above all, a quiet declaration. I know who I am and I don't need your validation. Stoicism is not the absence of feeling. On the contrary, Stoics feel deeply, but they don't let emotion dictate behavior. They hurt, but they don't lash out in hate. They're disappointed, but they don't seek justice in chaos. They seek power in command. That's why they cannot be shaken. You stayed too long, believed too much, forgave too freely. But then you realized, silence is no longer tolerance, it's a boundary. Silence to protect your dignity. Silence to stop hurting yourself. Silence to return respect not to them, but to yourself. They thought your silence was weakness, but they didn't see you're stronger than ever because you no longer need them to feel worthy. Your silence is not emptiness. It's space to rebuild your life. No more reacting to pain. No more clinging to what's broken. No more explaining yourself to someone who never wanted to understand. On a world that thrives on judgment, on exposure, on conflict, the one who remains silent holds the real power. As Marcus Aurelius wrote, you have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength. You don't need to win in their eyes. You don't need a crowd on your side. You just need to never betray yourself again, and then you'll see your silence said everything. No arguments, no conclusions. Just the unwavering presence of someone who chose growth over revenge, composure over rage, peace over noise. Stoicism is strength in silence, and you are the living proof of it. You don't need to prove anything because your stillness is already the clearest declaration of all. Your letting go is the final verdict. They hurt you, not with screams or blows, but with cold silence, by acting as if you didn't exist. They didn't leave all at once. They faded, bit by bit, leaving not just pain, but a deep doubt within yourself. And then one day, you let go, not through a heated argument, not with accusations or tearful begging, but with a quiet, resolute withdrawal. And that action, calm, firm, and unexpected, was the final verdict they never saw coming. Letting go is not escape, it's awakening. You let go, not because you were weak, but because you had become strong enough to stop accepting what you no longer deserved. You once believed that if you were patient enough, loving enough, they would change. But time taught you the truth. Not everyone is ready to grow with you. Not everyone is meant to walk the full path by your side. Stoicism teaches, you don't need to prove who was right or wrong. You only need to live by your principles and let time reveal the rest. And your letting go, gentle, steady, is the clearest ending of all. They thought you would always stay. They grew used to being forgiven without apology. They mistook your kindness for permanence. But they forgot, even the kindest soul has a limit. And that limit didn't come with rage, it came with release. You stopped explaining, you stopped trying, you stopped hoping. And in that silence, you delivered your verdict. A verdict doesn't need a declaration. It doesn't need evidence. It comes when you no longer allow others' chaos to control your peace. It's the ending that requires no door to be slammed because the door was always open. They simply chose never to walk through it. It's the message that needs no words because you had spoken enough in all the efforts they ignored. It's justice without a courtroom because life balances everything in its own time. They may think your departure was the end, but for you it was the beginning. Letting go wasn't just about walking away from them. It was walking away from a version of yourself, the one who forgot their worth to be accepted, the one who sacrificed peace for shallow affection, the one who confused persistence with self-destruction. You don't need to witness their downfall. You don't need to wait for their regret because you're letting go, though it wasn't. Revenge was the greatest awakening for anyone who once underestimated your value. Karma doesn't need your hand, it only needs you to release. And when you let go, not with anger but with serenity, you leave a space that nothing can fill. To be stoic is not to win over others. It is to win over yourself, to conquer the fear of abandonment, to shed the illusion that your worth depends on someone else's presence. Letting go is your declaration. I no longer remain in places that make me small. I don't wait for apologies from those too afraid to face themselves. I choose myself. And when you choose yourself, no one ever truly beats you. They simply lose by losing the chance to walk beside the most genuine, grounded, and kind version of you. No shouting yet, they hear you loud and clear. No punishment yet, they face consequences. No need to stay behind because you're already miles ahead. Your letting go is the verdict. Not to condemn anyone, but to declare one powerful truth. I chose myself, and I'm not looking back. Hi, ChatGPT. Your silence is a strategy. They once hurt you, not with direct blows, but with cold, calculated absences. They didn't shout in your face or humiliate you publicly. They chose a different tactic, neglect. They went silent exactly when you needed to be heard. And that silence became a weapon, one that made you question your own worth. You used to react. You tried to seek answers. You quietly hoped for an explanation. But then, you realized something powerful. Silence is a language, and you can speak it too, but for a different reason. You chose silence not as a form of surrender, but as a deliberate, conscious strategy. People often confuse silence with weakness, but Stoicism teaches otherwise. You don't need to respond to every insult. You don't need to speak against every injustice. Sometimes, the wisest move is to remain quiet. Your silence is not avoidance, it's a decision, a declaration that you no longer waste energy explaining yourself to those committed to misunderstanding you. You don't raise your voice just to be seen. You don't stay present to hold on to someone who's already withdrawn. And in the moment you stop reacting, you reclaim your inner power. Your silence is a strategy to protect your energy from unnecessary drain, a strategy to observe who stays when they can no longer control you, a strategy to escape the emotional manipulation loop where you are always the one bending, appeasing, sacrificing, because as long as you're speaking, they still have something to twist, to use. But in silence, they're left to face themselves. You used to think, if I explain enough, they'll understand. But the truth is, those who truly care don't need long explanations. And those who keep hurting you aren't lacking awareness, they're lacking accountability. That's when you choose silence, not to avoid, but to preserve your dignity. Not because you have nothing to say, but because your words won't change anything for someone who refuses to listen. Stoicism doesn't teach you to become numb, it teaches you when to speak and when silence speaks louder. As Marcus Aurelius wrote, you have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength. And you now realize you don't need to raise your voice to be heard. You only need to stop responding the way they expect. They expected you to scream, to beg, to plead. They were used to the version of you who always tried, always forgave, always held on. But when you chose silence, they panicked, because silence is the sign of someone who sees clearly and has already begun to walk away. No announcements, no closure. Your quiet exit becomes the loudest echo they'll ever face. Your silence is a wall, not to push people away, but to keep yourself safe within. It's your quiet declaration. I don't need to be understood to know my worth. I don't need to stay to prove my loyalty. I don't need to respond to end the story. I just need to be silent, to live, and to live with intention. You are no longer living to meet others' expectations. You are no longer easily wounded by intentional coldness. You are someone who understands. Not reacting is a reaction. Not replying is a reply. Not returning is progress. Your silence is a strategy not to lose yourself, a strategy to transform pain into strength, a strategy to leave not with resentment, but with peace. And while they continue playing power games with silence and indifference, you are using silence to rewrite your life with strength, clarity, and grace. Hi ChatGPT. You're not going back because you've come to fear. There were relationships, people who once meant the world to you. You gave your loyalty, your sincerity, and the most fragile parts of your soul. You believed that if you were kind enough, patient enough, they would understand. But they didn't. They took your presence for granted. They left without a word. And you at one point wanted to go back. You wanted to return, to ask why, to demand closure, to hope for a new beginning. Now you don't go back anymore. Not because you stopped loving, but because you've come too far to turn around. You've moved beyond the pain. You're no longer the person who trembles when their name pops up on your screen. You no longer lose sleep waiting for a message that never comes. You no longer excuse bad behavior as stress or they're just going through something. Now, you understand, loving someone doesn't mean tolerating them forever. You've passed the stage where you'd do anything to hold onto them. Now you hold onto yourself. And in that decision, you've already traveled far, far from the cycle of hurt and blind hope. You've moved beyond dependency. You once thought they were your only light. You believed that without them you were nothing. But their absence didn't destroy you. It woke you up. You learned how to care for yourself, to heal yourself, to get through days where no one stayed. And in that process, you realized you don't need anyone to feel whole. You just need you understood, loved, and strong. You've moved forward in awareness. Back then, you thought returning was proof of forgiveness. Now you understand sometimes going back is an act of self-betrayal. You can't build a future by forcing the past. You can't keep loving someone who keeps hurting you and never says sorry. Stoicism teaches if it's not within your control, let it go. What you can control is your response, and your response, silence, movement, distance, growth. You've come far enough that peace is now your standard. You no longer crave drama in relationships. You don't trade stability for fleeting emotions. You don't need someone who's around when convenient. You choose presence with accountability. You don't go back, not out of anger, but because you no longer fit in places that once made you feel small. They thought you'd always return, because you once forgave, once begged, once waited. They were wrong. You're not going back, not because you forgot them, but because you remember everything. Every cold silence, every time they vanished when you were breaking. You don't go back because you refuse to repeat an old chapter with someone who never rewrote themselves. You've moved on, not for revenge, but to live. In truth, you don't need them to see you thriving. You don't need their regret. You don't need to watch them fall. You only need one thing, peace. And that's why you keep walking. Every step forward is a quiet declaration. I choose myself and I'm not going back. You've come too far to turn around. You've survived sleepless nights, self-blame, repeated rejection of your hope down. You walk differently, not needing to be understood, only to be yourself. Not needing to win against anyone, only to overcome yourself. Not needing to return because the path ahead is finally open. You're not going back, not out of pride. You're not going back, not out of bitterness. You're not going back because you've simply gone too far. And the life you're building now doesn't leave room for what once held you down. Your lesson is Evo Lu Utio once thought pain was the end. That when someone left, went silent, grew indifferent, you had lost something irreplaceable. But no, that was only the beginning of a different journey, one where you no longer lived to be accepted but to understand and grow into your truest self. Don't call it failure, call it a lesson. And that lesson didn't just make you stronger, it evolved you into a deeper, sharper, and more resilient version of yourself. What did you learn from their silence? They went silent when you needed a conversation. They disappeared when you needed comfort. They made you feel like you were too much, too sensitive, too irrational. But that silence taught you the first, most crucial truth. Not everyone is capable of loving at the depth you can, and that is not your fault. Their silence didn't reflect your worth, it reflected their emotional limits. And once you understood that, you no longer resented them. You simply saw clearly, it's time to move on. You learned to stop chasing validation. You used to explain, to prove, to beg. You believed that if they could just understand you, they would change. But then you realized, someone who doesn't want to understand you never will, no matter how much you try. So you stopped. Not because you gave up, but because you woke up. From there, you learned how to sit quietly in your truth. No need for approval. No need for apologies. No need for closure. You discovered the strength of accepting reality without needing it to be different. You learned how to reset your boundaries. You had once accepted far less than you deserved. You once called their indifference being busy. You once labeled their irresponsibility as stress, but now you no longer confuse emotional laziness with love. You now know the difference between patience and self-betrayal. You began saying no. You began pulling your energy back from places that gave nothing in return. And here's the miracle. You didn't feel like you were losing anything. You felt free. You learned that leaving is sometimes necessary. You once feared walking away. But now, you understand. Not everyone deserves the best version of you. When you leave, you're not just protecting yourself. You're protecting your values, loyalty, kindness, integrity. You can't keep offering sacred parts of yourself in places where no one values them. Your departure is not born from pain, it's born from clarity. You learned how to love yourself more deeply. No one saved you from the long nights. No one wiped your tears. No one said, "I'm sorry I hurt you." Only you did that. You stood up, you held your own heart and whispered, "It's okay. I'll be fine. I deserve better." You transformed from someone who just wanted to be loved into someone who knows how to love themselves. And from there, you became untouchable. You evolved not to seek revenge, but to rebuild. You don't need them to come back and say, "You were right." You don't need to watch them feel regret. You don't need to see where their life ends up. Because now, you're busy living in peace, in healthy relationships, with your full, honest self. Your evolution isn't a performance to make anyone feel sorry. It's a lifelong commitment to you. The lesson wasn't in the words, it was in the transformation. You no longer send long messages, no longer post things hoping they'll notice, no longer beg for space in someone's life now. You live simply, clearly, peacefully, and that's the greatest lesson of all. You don't need to be healed by the one who hurt you. You just need to keep evolving. Your lesson was never in what they did. Your real lesson was in who you became after they left. The rise that needs no V and J and Sia, they hurt you, not just once, but many times. Sometimes with silence, sometimes with absence exactly when you needed them most. Sometimes with careless words that cut like knives, and sometimes with no words at all, just a cold, deliberate distance. You once believed they'd understand, that one day they would return and apologize, that justice would arrive in the form of regret, loss, or consequences. But as time passed, you came to a quiet realization: you no longer need that. You don't need them to suffer, you just need your own peace. Stoicism teaches, you cannot control others, you can only control your response. And the strongest response is not revenge, not exposing them, not yelling out your pain. It is walking forward with calm, without hate, because now you understand, hatred doesn't destroy them, it eats you alive. It turns you into someone you no longer recognize, bitter, guarded, closed, and you refuse to become that person. Forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting, it means setting yourself free. You don't have to erase what happened, but you choose not to let it rule your mind anymore. Not every time their name is mentioned. Not every night you lie awake wondering why. You've realized, not everyone knows how to love in a healthy way. Not everyone is mature enough to own their mistakes, and not everyone deserves a permanent place in your heart. So you forgive not because they deserve peace, but because you do. The rise happens in silence. You don't need to say much. You don't need to prove you're right. You don't need to post how well you're doing, because a true rise doesn't make noise. It isn't about applause or attention. It's about quiet consistency when you choose healing over hatred, rebuilding over destruction, moving forward instead of holding on. No hatred needed, because the lesson was already deep enough. You've learned things no school could ever teach. That no one can save you except you. That repeated pain stops being their fault and starts being your refusal to see clearly. That your kindness should never be given to those who treat it as ordinary. And so, you rise. Not for revenge, not for recognition, but because you finally understand, evolution doesn't require an audience. They didn't fall, and you don't need them to. You don't need them to feel lonely, broken, or regretful to feel that justice was served. Because real justice doesn't come from their collapse, it comes from your stability. Karma doesn't need you to watch. Truth doesn't need you to shout. The universe doesn't need you to judge. It only needs one thing: that you keep walking forward. You don't need a beautiful ending. You just need a real one. They never apologized, never explained, never came back. And yes, that used to hurt, but now you know. Closure doesn't come from the one who hurt you. It comes from the decision to say, I'm done. You don't need another message, another meeting, another explanation. What you need is a new chapter. Without them. Rising is when you keep your heart soft, even when you had every reason to harden. Real strength is not retaliation, not revenge, not making someone regret losing you. Real strength is choosing gentleness even after your heart was shattered. You don't need to hate to prove your power. You don't need to rage to be heard. You don't need to become cold to avoid future pain. You just need to master yourself. The greatest rise is when you stop needing them to pay because you've already found your worth, and that worth cannot be measured by their regret, proven by their failure, or validated by their return. It lives quietly in the stillness of your soul. No hatred, no bitterness, no revenge, just a person coming back to life, a soul returning home, a heart learning to beat again, this time for itself. The best revenge is growth. They hurt you. No shouting, no insults, just indifference, disappearance, the cold disregard for your emotions, and somehow that was enough to make you feel abandoned, unseen, unworthy. You once believed the only way to restore the balance was to make them regret it, that one day they'd realize how much you mattered, that one day they'd pay for what they did. But then you understood, the best revenge is not making them feel your pain. The best revenge is realizing you no longer need revenge at all. You didn't retaliate. You evolved. You didn't expose anyone. You didn't need to prove you were right and they were wrong. You didn't need them to fall for you to rise. Instead, you turned inward. You learned how to understand your emotions instead of denying them. You learned how to set boundaries instead of silently enduring. You learned how to love yourself instead of waiting to be rescued. You started to grow quietly, steadily, and without needing to prove anything to anyone. You no longer needed them to admit their wrongs because you stopped living in the past. You once wished they'd come back and say, I'm sorry, I was wrong. But then you realized an apology can't heal a wound when it comes from a soul that hasn't changed. So instead of waiting for their remorse, you chose forgiveness, not for them, but for yourself, to walk forward without carrying the weight of resentment. You didn't become like them, and that's your greatest victory. They were cold. You stayed warm. They were detached. You stayed caring. They disappeared. You learned how to show up for yourself. Marcus Aurelius once said, the best revenge is not to be like your enemy. And you lived those words. You grew, and that's something they may never reach. You no longer live to please others. You no longer sacrifice your worth just to keep someone close. You no longer wait for anyone to validate your existence. You live clearly, kindly, and peacefully, not to prove a point, but because that's who you truly are. And that is revenge without anger, justice without noise, and power without force, just growth. Sometimes, the best revenge is no revenge at all. Just peace, just silence, just moving on. Let karma do what it always does. Return energy to its source. You don't need to prove anything. Your growth, your peace, your unshaken calm. That's the real victory. If this message resonated with you, like, comment, and subscribe for more Stoic wisdom and inner strength content. Remember, you are powerful not because you react, but because you rise.